My cellmate is a serial rapist. That said, he keeps an immaculate bunk, keeps to himself, and is gluten-free, so he gives me all his pastries. Let me clarify. Terrible human being, terrific roommate.
Hi, I'm Christopher John Farley, a senior editor with the Wall Street Journal. Today my guest is John Lithgow. He is the star of the new series, Trial and Error. So the fascinating thing about Trial and Error, it seems to be a spoof of some of the other sort of crime, serial dramas we see out there,
Yes.
like Serial, like The Making of a Murderer. Is that what you're trying to do here? Tell me a bit about the genesis of this project.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
All right, I got the nail on the
As a matter
head.
of fact, Jeff Astroff, who's one of our co-creators of the show with Matt Miller, he saw an episode of Staircase about 3 years ago. I think he was sitting with his wife, and halfway through he said, wait a minute, just turn the dial 2 clicks to the right and you've got farce. He said, if this lead character were played by Stephen Carell, this would be the funniest comedy you've ever seen. Unfortunately, he didn't think of me at the time, but 3 years later, he did.
The setup's a little bit edgy because you play someone who's accused of a crime, a murder of his wife, and you get some comedy out of that.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever feel like you go too far, that maybe there's things you can't joke about?
Well, it certainly is startling, but it's hilariously funny from the very first second, mainly because, well, all the characters we play them as real as we possibly can, and it's shot in a documentary style that's uncompromising. It's just exactly the same as Dateline or any of these shows, but these are completely absurd people. In my case, I'm a man who may or may not have murdered his wife, and at any given point, I have to play it plausibly as an innocent or guilty man. And my solution was to play him as, like, all id, a man with absolutely no impulse control and no sense of proportion or priorities. To him, the tiniest thing, like the cable guy not arriving, is absolutely as important as the fact that his wife has just been murdered, possibly by him. You know, it's that kind of almost breathlessly frantic character. So, and I am, between the two of us, I'm the only one who knows whether I did it.
Now, I've heard that by the end, though, we'll find out whether or not your character actually committed the murder he's accused of committing on the show. Is that going to find? Are we going to find that out?
Exactly. And even though the show is kind of wildly funny, it still functions exactly the same way these series function. New twists and turns in the plot, red herrings, misleads, clues showing up, other crimes being committed that may or may not be connected. And episode by episode, it functions exactly the same way as an unfolding mystery series functions. So you got two things going for you: suspense and lunatic laughter.
And after they go through your character's journey, they're going to examine another crime next season? Is that the way it's going to work?
In their dreams, that's how it unfolds, a different major crime every year, with the same hopelessly incompetent defense team.
And are you someone that watches some of these true crime dramas and documentaries, like the podcast Serial or Making a Murderer, something that's on your DVR at home?
Not really. I paid a lot of attention to the Jinx. That was pretty fascinating to me. But no, I look around for really great scripted TV.
And what do you think draws people to these true life dramas?
Well, I mean, they are true life and with very high stakes. People caught in the midst of life-changing catastrophes, and there is something very compelling about that. I just prefer it dramatized and fictionalized and performed by me.
Of course, you're involved in another real-life drama, The Crown, playing Winston Churchill.
If there is one thing I've learned in 52 years of public service, it is that there is no problem so complex, no crisis so grave that it cannot be satisfactorily resolved within 20 minutes. So, shall we make a start?
Why do you think the producers thought of you, an American, to play this role to begin with?
I have no idea, but I'm glad they did. When I asked Stephen Daldry, the producer-director of the series, I sat down with him after I'd said yes. I was set, I was cast. I said, "Why did you cast me?" And his first answer was, well, Churchill's mother was an American. But beyond that, I think Peter Morgan, the writer, had an interesting explanation when we did a panel together. He said, "We in England suffer from a certain Churchill fatigue. Like all the major actors have played Churchill. You've had Albert Finney and Brian Cox and Brendan Gleeson and Timothy Spall. They sort of needed a curveball. They needed something surprising." A lot of people raised their eyebrows when they heard that I was playing the part, for sure. But I think they saw the wisdom of it.
Playing Winston Churchill, as you have, do you feel more respect for him, or are you now sort of more in tune to all the flaws that he actually had as a real person?
Well, both. I mean, a person's flaws doesn't necessarily take away your reverence for him. He was a deeply complicated man, for sure. I found him inexhaustibly fascinating. I've never done so much research for any role, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was just so fascinated. As an actor, anticipating playing this man as an old man, I found his young years to be the most informative information. The fact that he was a very forlorn, unhappy, and neglected child who felt like a total failure. He seemed to fail at everything he tried at school, and his parents never came to see whatever he did anyway. He was a very unhappy and insecure child. To me, his whole history, it's so interesting to look at it in light of that. In a sense, he fiercely overcompensated. He was a tremendously decisive, powerful man who had this sentimental, maudlin, kind of tearful streak. He had a white-hot temper, and yet he had a very deft wit. He loved to make people laugh. He was a huge drinker, which also informs just about everything he did. And he took a bath every single day of his life. I mean, you put all these elements together, and you have a very compelling, often very funny, and very fallible character. And this is, a character man. You just look everywhere for characters like that.
Winston Churchill, historical figure, playing him in The Crown, a very serious, high-minded drama. And you're also in this mockumentary, Trial and Error. As an actor, do you approach both roles in the same way, with the same sort of seriousness? Is the preparation different? Is your mindset different going into a comedic role versus a pure dramatic role?
Well, that's a good question. I had a lot more time to compose Winston Churchill. The Trial and Error happened very fast, as comedy does, and it should. It's very larky and lunatic. But I certainly, you used the word seriousness. Do I approach it with seriousness? I always approach it with seriousness, even if it's crazy funny. I always feel that there's got to be a substance and a spine to a character, that the comedy shouldn't just be arbitrary shtick. I and the writers and this wonderful director, Jeff Blitz, we spent a lot of time finding the real substance to this man. His behavior is pretty crazy, very, very funny, but it has to be real. You have to sort of see where he's coming from. And if you do, you draw the audience to you. The audience begins to identify with the potential criminal. And we wanted that to happen. We wanted people to root for Larry, even like Larry, not want him to be convicted.
Well, John Lithgow, thanks a lot for coming to the Wall Street Journal. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.